Hi everyone, thank you very much for joining the session today. And for those of you that are watching the recording, my name is Liz Smee and I'm a product solutions specialist for Altmetric and Dimensions, which are part of digital science. And today, this session is going to be focusing on showcasing research, so taking more of an institutional approach to research promotion. And we are looking at using the Altmetric Explorer from a comms and media perspective. However, some of the things that I mentioned today would be really useful in when you are engaging with media teams or trying to understand what research is having that engagement and potential impact outside of academia as well. So, when we're talking about news sources in Altmetric Explorer, just to give you a little bit of an understanding of the content, we have a number of news platforms that we follow, and this has been going since 2011 in terms of news content, but you'll see most of the news content in Altmetric Explorer from 2012 onwards. And we don't cover all of news, as you can imagine. There are many news outlets globally, but what we do focus on are news outlets that are mentioning research outputs. We do take suggestions for coverage. So if you do have any media and news outlets that we're not covering currently that you would like us to include, we welcome those suggestions as well. So how it works is once we make that connection with the news platform and making sure that all the metadata is there, we then connect to that via an API or an RSS feed. So we are then getting that information into Altmetric Explorer in a very timely manner. And we see that most comms and media professionals use Altmetric to discover and access the published research content, also to find journalists for targeted distribution lists, which I'll talk a little bit more about today, and report on the reach and influence of the publicity of the research outputs at an institution as well. So why Altmetric Explorer? So some people might say, well, I could just use Google, or I could just have a look at some of our media monitoring platforms. And that's very true. You could use those platforms. However, we know that by using Altmetric Explorer, you're actually refining to those that are just mentioning your research outputs. So it's very quick and easy to identify those outlets that are mentioning your research. It's a really interesting way to promote research, and by understanding some of the sentiment around that already. So there may be some sentiment on X or Facebook or other platforms that you can then harness in some of your media releases. And it is a way that you can search for field-specific research in a scholarly way, and you can assess that newsworthiness or strategic fit for your research organisation. It also gives you, the opportunity to delve deeper into seeing what's happening behind the scenes. So in terms of research promotion, and this is, again, focused really more at that comms and media level, what we suggest is that whenever you are writing a press release or any kind of content that will go on your website regarding research, to embed a DOI or other persistent identifier, such as a handle for your institutional repository there at University of Newcastle. We also recommend that if you are doing a verbal interview, to put together a transcript of that interview and then put in the identifier so that we can then track it. So again, that transcript could live on your repository there at University of Newcastle. Also remembering to put the identifier that links directly to the research output and not a secondary citation of that work, because then we won't see that Altmetric attention score increase. So firstly, to discover content. So some of the attendees today may have heard me talk about this before, but the key fields that you can use to search Altmetric Explorer are on the screen here. So things like keywords. So you might want to look at things like the metaverse, for instance, and all research outputs from University of Newcastle that may mention that, because it might be a topical thing in the news. And that way you can quickly identify not only the research outputs that you have, but maybe the experts there that you have at the University of Newcastle to then speak about. They may have published in the past, but they may want to speak about that in an interview, for instance, or have some kind of commentary. Because I know that institutions do get reporters or other people in the community engaging with them and asking them for expert opinion in a particular field. So that's one way that you can do that. Subjects, so that is the FOR code, so the 2020 FOR codes in platform, and that allows you to search for a particular field of research if you'd like some experts, to find some experts in that field. Even things like affiliation, so if you are for the University of Newcastle, or you might want to see another institution as well, so you're more than welcome to use that field. The title of the output, just in case you'd like to report on that. Even things like looking at sustainable development goals, which, as we know, is very topical at the moment. But even others like looking at journals and collections or publishers, funders is another one. So using these fields is a way to refine your search to get the content that you're after. Another one is to look at the publication date. So you might want to look at publications that have been published this year, or the last 6 months, or the last 3 months, and that's really quickly to do in Altmetric Explorer. But you can also have a look at Altmetric mentions between particular times. So the research output itself may have been produced 2 or 3 years ago, but it's become a topic of interest again, and it's had some mentions. And again, that's a really interesting way to report on that from a media and comms perspective. So one of the other things I should say is that, yes, media and comms professionals at institutions usually do have a very well-established network. However, sometimes research happens and research is published without a media and comms team name, just because of the sheer size of an institution. But other than that, it might be that the media and comms team can then actually report back to the researcher, which is also actually nice. So you can also, there's another aspect when we're looking at promotion of an institution, where it's something that might fit in with our strategy. So you can use Altmetric Explorer for that, but you can also find publications that may not necessarily fit in with the strategy, but they have really interesting engagement online. And we can see that shift as well. So things that we can do in institutional search from the 1st of January 2023, and I've done this for University of Newcastle, and we can see that there are 3,268 outputs that we're tracking in Altmetric, and 1,892 of those have attention. Interestingly, we can then, start to see the mentions behind that. So social media, the news and blogs, other sources, policy and patents as well. So we can start to understand what where our impact is coming from. So I'm going to go into platform and we can have a look at how I do that. So in Altmetric Explorer, we can go into the edit search. I'm just going to clear my fields because I already have that on. We can go into the edit search here. And if I was a media and comms professional, I could do this either at an institutional level, I could do it for a particular department or a particular author, because you do have that institutional feed coming into Altmetric Explorer, which allows us to identify verified outputs from your institution. So at the moment, you can see on the full Altmetric database, I can move that over to my institution only to make sure that I'm only looking at research from University of Newcastle. So again, I can use any of these fields to refine my search, but we can see from a particular date. So if I just do from the 1st of January 2023, I can run my search. And then I can identify those outputs. So again, I can go into the research outputs tab and have a look at that a little bit further, but I can also have a look on the timeline to see when these research outputs have been mentioned. And this is particularly useful for comms and media to understand where their research has been mentioned and when it's been mentioned as well. So we can see that there are a lot of news and mentions on this particular day. There's a bit of a peak here. So if I was a media and comms professional, I could click into that and then start to understand why. So we're looking at research outputs about stroke recovery. So is that because of something that's happened globally? Is that a particular week that involves stroke recovery? And even planning for those types of weeks. So if we know a week is coming up or we know an event is coming up, we can actually use Altmetric Explorer that way too, by searching by keywords to make sure that we might have an expert that could speak on that or on that topic, or that we have a research output that we can then promote on that topic. The other thing we can do is find out more about a new paper or research output, so we can quickly identify research outputs that are having an impact. So, and by doing that, we can go to, again, the search bar. I'm going to clear my fields and start again. So this time I am going to leave all filters off. I can go to my institution only and run search. Go to the research outputs tab, and then I can sort by publication date, newest first. So I can see some research outputs here. So you can see there's one here, 7. I'm going to talk about that one in a little bit, but we can understand that there are some that don't have any news attention yet, but they've got some engagement on Twitter, on blogs. So we might want to see what the discussion is around that, and if we can do a media release, if it's of interest to the community. But this particular research output, I'm just going to bring that up as a link, so I'm not scrolling through the whole database and making you dizzy. So this was published in 2023 in September, and we can see there's already been mentioned in 63 news outlets. So I just scrolled down through that research outputs tab to find this one. And we can see it's got a fairly high altmetric attention score, and it's been mentioned in a number of news sources. So if I go across to the news tab now, I can see where this has been mentioned and what sources are mentioning it. I can look at whether from a media and comms perspective, I think that's a reputable source. If I think that it's something that we can then go off the back of and do a press release from the institution level as well. And again, you can scroll down that way, so you can look at it from the details page. Or what I could do is copy the DOI and I can go to edit search, clear my filters. Once I identified that particular publication that I'm interested in, use the scholarly identifiers where I paste in that DOI. And now I can just look at information regarding that particular research output. So if I go over the timeline, I can see when it's been mentioned over time, and it's probably because it was released around this time. There may have been a preprint of this particular research output. I can see where that, so rather than looking at a corpus of publications, I'm only looking at the one publication, so we can see where that's having some engagement in terms of X, Facebook news and policy. And I can also have a look at the particular mentions, so I can see the sentiment around. Sorry, it's just timed out there, I think. Sorry, I put a filter on. Just let me reset that. There we go. I can see the mentions there, and I can also have a look at the sources. So from a media and comms perspective, I want to know who's talking about this, maybe particularly from a news perspective. So rather than looking at the details page where there's a lot of information, I can look at it at a very high level here, and I can see how many mentions there are from particular sources. Okay. Finding media contacts. So this is probably one of my favorite ones in terms of a comms and media perspective. So the media teams usually have a distribution list that they will hold for embargoed research, or they have a number of reporters and journalists that they would look to share research with for a press release. So really important to maintain those lists and keep them updated. And that changes all the time. Journalists, of course, move all the time. So it's really interesting to use Altmetric Explorer in this way. So if we have a research output here, what we can do again is go onto the news sources and have a look at some of those that have mentioned this research output. And we might look at the type of outlet it is, and again, trying to find one that is reputable to us. And I found one for this particular research output. So I'm going to go into platform and show you rather than looking at the slide deck. Okay, so if I go into news, I'm just going to look at the first mention here, which is from Medical News Today. So if I click into that, I can obviously read the article, but I can see who it's been, who the journalist or reporter is in this case. And then I can have a look and read more about Catherine's profile. So I can see that she's been in her career as a scientific editor on the British Journal of Psychiatry. She's moved to country life, but she has a particular interest in nutrition and health. And I think that this is a person that I would like to put on my distribution list. So sometimes they have email addresses on their pages, sometimes they don't, because obviously they don't want to get spammed. Sometimes they might have a Twitter profile on here, but other times, you might just want to do a quick search for Catherine, and that's what I did. And I actually got onto a platform called Muckrack, which has some further information about particularly journalists, and has a look at their previous articles that they've written, and also the fields that they're interested in. So again, if I was a media and comms perspective and I go, okay, Catherine's a great contact, I want to put her on our distribution list for everything to do with nutrition, dementia, or any other health related research coming out of the University of Newcastle, you can then use your platforms. It might be something like Meltwater that you have, where you store the information for a journalist, and then you can actually tag them for specific subject areas. So that's a way that you can use Altmetric Explorer to easily identify reporters and journalists for dissemination of research. And then for reporting, so one of the other things that's really interesting is that we don't always know where, as researchers, I mean, I was previously, in a previous life, I was a researcher, you don't always know where your research is being mentioned. And if they're not in the Altmetric Explorer every day, or they're not getting alerts, then they might not be any of the wiser that they're actually having some engagement with their research. So in terms of reporting, this could be for an individual, it could be again for a faculty or department or institution, but you can definitely use Altmetric Explorer for reporting as well. So this is where I'm going to use that number 7. And again, I will go back and show you how I got there. So I just want to have a look at, sorry, just got to move my Zoom panel. There we go. I want to look at research outputs from University of Newcastle. I'm going to keep that quite broad. I'm going to run my search, go to research outputs again, and then I might go by newest first, and then that one comes up with a lot of with some news attention. So if I click into that, I actually see here that it's one news mention has cited this research But that's really interesting to me. So maybe we haven't done a press release on it yet. Maybe it's something that's really important. So I might want to then report back to the researcher and understand more about that research. The other thing that we can do in terms of reporting is have a look at mentions between certain periods. So the publication may be from 2022 or 2020 or prior, but it may have mentions during the past 3 months, the past month, week, 3 days. So I'm going to be a bit generous in this example and go the past 3 months and run my search. And this time I'm not going to sort by a publication date. I might have a look at mentions, the number of mentions in the past 3 months. So we can see here, this global assessment of soil pollution, that report was published in 2021, but is receiving a lot of mentions during the last 3 months. So again, I might want to follow that bouncing ball, have a look at that research output, start to see that engagement. If I want to see that over time, what I can do again is copy that DOI and go back out and place that in the scholar identifier section. Okay, so I can have a look at that over time. And as we can see, there's been a number of mentions this year, mostly on Twitter. So, and around the 4th of September there, quite a high number on Twitter. So again, trying to understand why that's being mentioned. And we can, again, if you had a shorter time period, so if you had a week, you can get on top of that and that momentum as well as it is a comms person. Another way to use Altmetric Explorer is to look for corresponding authors. So there is that etiquette in the research sector where if there is a corresponding author on a research output, then that is the person to contact. So for any media news or expertise on the piece. And we can identify that. So if I have a look at an example for University of Newcastle, I can see here by quickly linking out from the DOI or the PubMed ID, whichever one. Fix all those cookies. So what I can see here is some information about the excuse me, sorry, that's not the right link. I have to apologize. Okay, right. Let me just do that again. I've had a bit of a blip in my internet. I do apologize. I might just turn my camera off. Sorry, not to be rude, just if I'm having trouble with my bandwidth. Okay, so in Altmetric Explorer, what I can do is have a look for a research output and then have a look at the corresponding author details. So for this one here, effects of plant-based protein. So I'm just going to type that title in. I'll just do that. No, it doesn't like it. Maybe did I spell that incorrectly? Yes, I did. All right, so if we have a look at this output here, and again, you may know as a comms and media professional which outputs that you have a corresponding author for. But if I go and follow this DOI, then we can see here that the University of Newcastle is the contact institution and the author is from that institution. So there definitely is that etiquette. However, I would say that if you have an instance where, say you have got, I clear those fields now and look at mentions between the last week. Oh goodness, sorry. Not very good at driving that. There we go. From University of Newcastle, what I can do is say I'm not our institution is not the corresponding author on one of these. There is still a benefit there because we can actually then liaise with the other institution and say, hey, this has been really popular. So why don't we then do a press release on it? So a really interesting way to use Altmetric Explorer. So again, if I'm just going to go into this one here, for instance, and if I go out to the DOI, it might be that we are not the corresponding author. We can find that on the article, just like you would. Just do a search for that. Oh no, corresponding. Here we go. So it's at Imperial College in the UK. So that's the corresponding author. But, you know, if it's been mentioned in news, particularly in Australia or in Asia Pacific region, we might want to reach out to that person that has been the corresponding author and say, hey, let's do a press release on this. And again, it's working with the other comms teams as well at those institutions. So it could either be that you reach out to the researcher at your organisation, who then reaches out to Majid there at Imperial, or, you know, the comms teams, depending on the relationship that you have as across those institutions. So at this point, I'm just going to pause for any questions before I go into another kind of demonstration through platform to see if any of the, I can't see anything in the chat. No. Does anybody want to verbalize any questions at all? If it's too hard to type them, I can understand. Right. Okay. All right, so we can go back through Altmetric now and just have a look at some other examples of how to use the fields. So from a comms and media perspective, say if you have your DVCR or somebody in the executive team want to understand the news attention to a particular research discipline. So we can use FOR codes. So say if I want to do, I'm just going to do climate change science here, because that's usually very topical. So what I can do is just ignore that warning there. But what I can do here is look at my institution only, look at the climate change science, FOR code. Again, I can put a date range on here. So that's probably, you don't want to be looking at all time. So you might want to be looking at in the last year or so, or the last 2 years. So I'm just going to do from 2020. And I'm going to run my search, and we can see that there are 30 outputs with attention in this particular FOR code. Now I can have a look then at the research outputs. So I can see that in terms of the altmetric attention score, but I can also then see the number of mentions in the past year, the past 6 months, to understand some reporting around what's been happening in that space. So if I go 3 months, for instance, we can see a lot of things about bushfire, dinosaurs, so those types of mentions. So what's been topical from our research organisation in the last 3 months. I might put that to 6 months, and we can see that we've still got things like bushfire and reef. So a lot of, again, because it's based on this climate change science. So that's something that you can report on. And I did mention this in some of our previous sessions, but I can start my video again, I think. But in this, you can save searches. So if you have a particular search that you would like to keep track of as a comms professional, you can save the search and go into your save searches and then create a shareable report. So again, if you did need to report quickly to some of the executive team or other stakeholders around the institution, you can create one of these shareable reports. Some edits around that, so you can give it a nice title. You can change this graph down here to only be news mentions if you like, or have the news, the blogs, the policy, and the X mentions. And then have a look at those top research outputs. So again, you're quickly identifying where your research is having engagement over the last 6 months, and based on that field of research. Just going to close that now. And I should say that report will update automatically. So if you did want a static version, just create a PDF of that. Okay, so, and one of the last things I will show is just how to use the other fields that we have here. So if you wanted to look at a particular research output, you can use that scholarly identifier section that we've used. If a researcher comes to you, if they have an ORCID profile, you can use that as well. If you would like to understand that research, or from a medium comms perspective, just understand that researcher's portfolio and what kind of attention that they're having. And also, we might want to have a look at particular topics in the global sphere, and if trying to find those experts. So again, you can use that keyword searching rather than using a field of research or sustainable development goal. You can use that keyword searching to search for a topic. So for instance, if I choose metaverse and look at my institution only, let's have a look. If so we've got 8 outputs. So again, from a medium comms perspective, this is interesting. So we've got 8 outputs that have been tracked, but none of those have received attention. So if I have a look at these research outputs, I can then go, okay, why haven't these got attention? The metaverse is, or it might be health in the metaverse, or it might be a little bit more specific than the metaverse. But let's put a press release out, because none of these research outputs have got attention, and maybe we can mention 2 or 3 of these research outputs depending on the focus of our release. So really interesting ways to showcase then what you're doing at the university. So it might be something that is a new chapter that you're moving into. So if that's part of your strategy and you want to find those research outputs really quickly and help promote them, that's a great way to find those ones that haven't received attention and possibly should, given the what's happening in a global context. Okay, I don't have any more content to deliver for this session, but if you would like to ask any questions, please do. And I'm also available offline. So if you have any questions about using Altmetric Explorer for a specific use case in media and comms, please let me know, and I'll be more than happy to help. Just have one more look in the chat. Don't think there are any questions there. So, so thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it. I know we have finished early for the session, but yeah, if anything comes up After the session, if you're like me and you always think of questions afterwards, please don't hesitate to get in contact.